Pressed right now on Smooth 98.1. I am Khadeejah Ojani.
And I'm Valentine Ohu. Welcome to Freshly Press 91.
All right, so right now we have our analyst in the studio with us this morning. We have with us Tunde Okufi. Hello, Tunde.
Hi, Khadeejah.
Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
We also have Nwaji, the corporate MC. Hello.
Morning, Khadeejah. Morning, Valentine. Morning, Tunde. And good morning, Lagos.
All right. So, you know what to do, Lagos. Be a part of the show. We'd love to hear from you. You can definitely reach us via our WhatsApp platform. Our number is 0809 4440981. Remember, you can also tweet at smooth981FM as well. Remember to use the hashtag freshlypressed981. So we're going to be looking at some of the stories we have in here today. And we're going to kick off with this one. Uproar as Buhari makes fresh request for $29.96 billion loan. Yes, looks like we are digging into that purse again. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday resent the 29.96 billion naira 2016 2018 external borrowing plan to the Senate for its consideration and approval. Now, of course, I believe this is something that was rejected under Saraki's tenure, and now he has resent this bill. So, Nwaji, I'm going to come to you with this question. Here we are borrowing money again. Some people are concerned, even though the International Monetary Fund has warned Nigeria against rising debts, and the debt office has also said out of Nigeria's total debt profile of 25.7 trillion as of June 2019, the external borrowing accounts for about 32%, while 68% is domestic. The question is, we're borrowing and we're borrowing and we're borrowing. We're not making much money. Our revenue profile isn't looking so great. Should we really start getting concerned?
Well, I mean, Cheta, who's always on the show, says something fantastic when he says, Nigeria is not broke, Nigeria is bankrupt. And there's a big difference when you now begin to analyze that. So it's not about the money issue. It's about cost optimization and what we're doing with the monies that we do have. When you now begin to dig in with specific regard to what you mentioned, Khadeejah, is that the cost of running government in Nigeria is extremely too high, which is why there's a lot of arguments about us moving towards a parliamentary system, because parliamentary systems seem to be a lot cheaper than running the kind of federal systems that we run now, especially from a financial point of view. But if you take a step back, taking into consideration all the factors that we had before us, we do not seem to want to do things from a contextual point of view. And what do I mean by that? Necessity is the mother of invention, okay? We do not thrive in an economy or an environment where you have innovation, you have free thinking, you have things that are being built in an organic matter for us to now begin to generate the kind of revenues that can sustain us. And the reasons why you don't have that is because you don't have an enabling environment, you don't have the necessary infrastructures. Now, I can appreciate from the perspective of the government that the cash might not be available to be able to run these infrastructure projects that lead to all these particular things. But the reasons you have to ask yourself is that why isn't that particular cash available? When you now begin to have arguments around the subsidy payments that we're paying, and back to the particular argument that I made earlier about the recurrent expenditures that with the federal government of running government. So the conversations we now need to have is, okay, fine, we may not have the quote unquote P&L margin money to be able to invest in all these different things. So let's now begin to take a look at our cost profile to see where we can now begin to cut costs from an optimization point of view, so we can free up some cash to be able to do some other things. However, if for whatever reason you don't want to go that route, my further issue is that why now borrow this money at a block? Why don't you look at where the critical areas of investment need to happen so that you can now take care of some core infrastructure projects that can now actually lead to other things, build on that particular project that allows you to now generate revenue so you don't have to borrow again. So as opposed to you now looking for $30 billion, maybe you can just take one or two and decide to now focus on something like healthcare, focus like something on education, and then maybe take on one or two infrastructure projects, a few major, transportation networks, some security systems. Take things at a block, because what that now allows you to do is that you don't necessarily have to now further put yourself in debt, but what you've done is taking care of some critical areas that will now allow the economy to now really take off. Because when you now go into the thread of this particular article, the CEO of NESG made a fantastic point that you're not being creative enough, because you have to be able to create a place where people are healthy. people are healthy when they drive on good roads. People are healthy when they have fantastic clinics and all these different things. So when you now have an environment where people are now operating from an optimal productivity point of view, the economy now benefits from it. So why don't you address some core areas where the Nigerian citizenship can now actually benefit from directly, and then it can now have a knock-on effect towards positive things. But to now begin to go out with this very archaic perspective of let's go borrow money, especially when you now want to go towards the AFDB or the China Exim Bank and all these different things to now build up cash, it's a ridiculous business model that can no longer be sustainable. It may have taken place in 1983, which was what got him in trouble in the first time, but you cannot replicate that model then. What we were doing then was going to the IMF or World Bank. We can't do that anymore. So you now want to go to other financial institutions. It just doesn't make sense. Necessity is the mother of invention. Let's get creative, let's get innovative, and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, so but I mean, when you say it that way, it seems as though they don't know the right thing to do. I don't want to assume they do, but it sounds like an automatic action that they do. If they actually know, somebody will just flick a finger and everything will fall into place. But we know that the economic situation is not the way it was prior to 2016. There are challenges, there are inflationary rates and on things that happen like that.
How does that change your cost profile?
Well, it doesn't necessarily change it. I'm just saying the direction that they will take. Maybe it's a gradual step. It progressively get there. The road construction works that's going on, especially alternative means of transport.
Valentine, I'll say that's why I said, how does that ignore your cost profile? The things that you're referring to, I understand, but then you are only focusing on your top line when you're looking at your balance sheet. In situations like that, you also have to look at the entire balance sheet as well, which now include the cost aspects as well. You can't just look at, oh, I'm not making enough money, let me go borrow. Okay, do you know what? Maybe I need to cut back a bit so I can now have more cash to do some more things. That's what I would do in that particular situation.
Yes. Looking inside first.
Yeah. So really, in a sense, in my perspective, we don't even have, we almost don't have the luxury of this debate as to whether we should borrow money or not borrow money. We've for decades beyond the present administration, before 2015, we've had a huge deficit in so many sectors. There's an infrastructure deficit, there's an education deficit, there's a health deficit, all sorts of things that we haven't paid attention to for decades and decades. I mean, literally, maybe in many areas, you'd argue since independence, things have just deteriorated. So there's a huge deficit and we don't have funds. The only way to fix it is to borrow. So borrowing is not the problem. Our problem, we're distracted that we're taking our eyes off the ball here. Problem is what we do with the money. It's corruption. That we've been borrowing from the beginning. We just keep wasting it.
So that's my point to me,
Right.
which
So
is
that's
why,
the-
I understand what you're saying, but that is why borrowing does not solve the issue. Because if you borrow, we're going to just keep digging ourselves into this hole. So why don't we take care of the issues that keep us having to borrow so that we don't have to borrow in the future?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
I guess you're saying that we could just perhaps borrow money, invest it in ourselves, so we have something to pay back.
And that's what I said. So I don't.
That's the plan, though. These are for specific projects.
Yeah, but I don't even.
Again, issues will they be spent on those projects?
Yeah,
actually invested.
And
thank you. That's why I said the critical projects.
We can't stand still, so we need to address these things. We don't have the cash. We have to borrow, right? Again, let's just hope that we're not leaving debt for future generations, as we have always
I think
done.
it's too late.
Right?
Hit the nail on the head.
You know,
So now
that's
you
what
know
it
this
is.
money's already spent
Yeah.
before we get it, right?
Yeah, well,
Oh boy.
Okay, you know what? Let's just go into our next story right now. P&ID. Nigeria pays 200 million naira bond to UK court. Now, the Nigerian government has provided a bond of $200 million to a court in the United Kingdom as part of efforts to overturn the $9.2 billion judgment debt against it in favor of an Irish firm, Process and Industrial Development. Now, today, how does this help us?
how does it help us? Well, it grants us, it's one of the conditions for the stay of judgment. The court had given a judgment, I think the UK court had given a judgment saying that we were to pay P&ID 6.6 billion, which was the original award that was granted in a court in DC, Washington DC, and that amount had risen to 9.6 billion.
9.6
Has risen to 9.6 because, I mean, essentially the difference being interest, the interest calculation from the time the judgment was made until now that we haven't paid, and the interest, will continue to count. So the bond is a security for, I mean, as law courts would say, that you need to put this money down so that we know that you're acting in good faith, so to say, because you've asked for a stay of judgment, because you want to. We're contesting certain elements and certain parts. Now that there are things in the story and that we've all known, but I highlighted even in the wording of the story to show that essentially we haven't taken this serious. We never do take things serious. We're just an 11th hour type of people. Contracts are sacrosanct, right? Whether the contract was fraudulent or not, whether the premises or the structure or the organization which you signed the contract with didn't fulfill their part or did fulfill their part, there's a contract. You're bound by that contract. Take it seriously. Even when organizations and deals or projects are legit, we don't honor contracts properly. Now, imagine it then becomes more painful when the premise, at least what it would seem from our perspective, that the organization seemed a bit like a shell, set up for the purpose of defrauding us. But it's clear, according to the terms of the contract, the Nigerian government didn't meet its obligation. We breached the contract, right? So in breaching the organization, P&ID received a judgment against us. If we had taken it seriously, perhaps we would have been able to prove that this company was fraudulent to begin with, right? And therefore, shouldn't have been awarded the thing. Now, see statements that we're making. We're saying over the last few weeks, investigations have revealed a very serious fraud. Over the last few weeks,
I think there was a 5-year gap somewhere in there.
We've had since 2013. Why didn't we take the original case seriously? We're saying over the last few weeks now, new things have come to place. They're saying that they've expanded, as a result, they've expanded the legal team. I mean, 6.6 billion naira is, when we're talking about borrowing, 6.6 billion naira is not small money by any stretch of the imagination, right? Even rich nations will struggle, not to talk of a nation like ours. And we take things like this, so on seriously. Is now we're stretching the legal team.
Today I'm gonna.
Let's hope it's given the focus that it deserves now. And if P&ID is proven to be fraudulent or not set up properly, or they were in breach of terms of the contract as well, then maybe this is set aside, or some other accommodation is arrived where we're not paying as much as this.
Just I think Tunde has captured it very perfectly. And for me, the two things is that P&ID would not be in the position they're in now if they were not given a sovereign guarantee.
Yes.
So the conversation should now be who gave them that sovereign guarantee. If you look at the terms of sovereign guarantee, I mean, they're going to ask for your grandmother's DNA. Okay? So for you to have granted P&ID that sovereign guarantee that's allowed them to get judgment, it is the highest levels. And I think that's a critical point that we keep ignoring, that there's no way they can have that conversation in any court of arbitration without that sovereign guarantee. And that is to Tunde's point about us not taking these things seriously.
So what's important to really find out is, first of all, the sovereign guarantee is not given by just anybody.
No, it has to be signed off by signed by the presidency.
Yeah, it's the highest levels, man.
So who? Because at this stage in the investigation and everything,
we only had one president at the time.
I was hoping that somewhere in the story I would see the name of him.
Yeah, we only had one president.
We only had one. Yeah. Look at the date. Look at the president. Boom. There you go. Bob's your uncle, man. Hey.
All right, guys. So we are going to be taking some more messages.
Yes, please. We have this one from Shola. It says future generations that are already in Canada. That's
what about those?
Shola, you hit that. Shola hit that tea in the morning.
And Lukman from Bagada says there's no way actually things will get done if the government does not borrow. I'm for borrowing if it's for infrastructure. If roads are built and told, government can pay back the loans.
I'm for borrowing if it's for infrastructure, but I don't believe in borrowing this amount for everything. That's just me.
He continues to say, besides all these governments, besides all this, the government needs to tighten its belt and shed its excesses. Borrow for projects, not for recurrent expenditures.
Thank you.
And Ike says the Nigerian government treats all contracts, including the one with its citizens, with disdain. Jalami from Badagry says.
All right, Brajomi says, how can we meet up the demand of Nigerians by providing her infrastructure and investment enable environment for job creation if we don't borrow? Do you know America has $21 trillion in debt? $2 trillion added within the last 3 years. So let's
look at what they're bearing.
First of all,
stop.
It's not being objective.
Yes, please. And boring is not the answer. Sorry. Imagine, I'm sorry to say this, everybody, please. Imagine you could not borrow. What would you do?
Yeah.
And this is what I always mean about necessity is the mother of invention. So stop thinking that is what I always say, start with what I can do for myself before I now go borrow. And in my personal thinking, if you actually go through a cost optimization exercise and find out how much money you can actually gain from that particular exercise and divert that towards some project, then your thinking will be recalibrated with regards to borrowing. So that is my perspective. I think borrowing should be the last resort. Look at cost optimization. What is the cost of running government and all these other projects that we do internally that don't make any sense? And then let's now look at how we can cut back on those, see how much money is available, and then we can talk about borrowing.
I think the most essential question really that you just asked, Waji, is what happens when you're not able to borrow anymore?
Exactly, that's my
When you
point.
max out on your
On your credits.
Are we willing to do the hard things? First of all, our
Thank you,
population is
Tunde.
ballooned out of control. It's outstripping GDP. Are we willing to do the kind of things that China did and said, you know what, you can't have more than one kid?
Boom.
You know, for example, and there are a bunch of other things. Yeah.
All right, we're straight to our next story right now. This one says federal government reviews stamp duty raises threshold to 10,000 naira. The federal government has reviewed the 50 naira stamp duty charges on electronic payments in the country after receiving backlash from Nigerians and industry stakeholders. So now, the 50 naira charge would be imposed on transactions above 10,000 naira as against payments above 1,000 naira that had taken effect across the country in September. So Tunde, this has someone like me who's already decided that I'm just going to get my cash.
Put your card under your
exactly.
Yeah, it's federal government. Every time I talk about this, I talk about the incoherence of our policies. You know, and your policies should all pull in the same direction. But clearly, with in this regard, it hasn't. On the one hand, you impose stamp duties, and then on the other hand, you say you're putting measures to encourage cashless, and this is integral to that. People building confidence in the electronic channels is integral to that, and some of the policies and things that the government have done, runs the risk of reversing the advances that whole sector and that industry has made. To me, this is natural. It's a matter of, thankfully, they're listening, which is, well, to be honest, the CBN and the regulator, it's not on. I'll just say that this is. They're often a step behind the industry, which is not. It's not globally. It's not wrong. The ideal thing would be that if regulation could lead the industry, or at least be in lockstep with the industry, but it's also not uncommon for it to be at least a step behind. So what happens is the regulator and the central bank puts out a policy, and then when they realize how it's received, adjusts. This is one of those adjustments. Perhaps there would even be further adjustments down the line.
Yeah, but Tunde, I'm sorry. Isn't
You're being very kind with your words.
No. Is also yes, my because I know.
No. But Tunde, isn't that why we have bankers committee? I'm sorry. Isn't
no? Waji, there's come on.
But he's stating the obvious. Some policies.
Some of those things.
Yeah, some
about being locked in step.
Yeah. So yes, there are bankers committees. There are a bunch of things, but very often some of these policies are handed down, and then you have to rubber stamp them. That's truth. Let's not lie about it. The government needs money, and they put out this 15 naira stamp duty. Forget it. And we're not even going to really bring back cashless if they didn't listen to people from the industry and said, you know what, you can't just impose the stamp duty. Why not also put measures in place to encourage cashless? But the truth is, both policies are at loggerheads. And back to the focus here is the threshold was for 1,000 naira. So anything else 1,000 naira and above will attract this 15 naira. Stamp duty. Imagine paying for if a 1,000 naira then being charged, having to be charged, and it's supposed to be
that for the past 2 weeks.
It's supposed to be charged to the merchant. So he's selling an item, and then he suddenly has to take 15 naira out of the merchant's not bound. So what happens?
He's going to transfer that cost.
Exactly. So what happens naturally, as with any cost when you run a business, you transfer it onto the customer, which is what's happened. They've raised the threshold to 10,000, but it will still happen for transactions above 10,000. They will add the 15 naira onto the customer. So raising it, to be honest, may favor small businesses that people who are selling items below 1,000, below 10,000. Another sector that I think they really need to look at is foil. It traditionally has enjoyed a different, the merchants or the dealers in that sector have enjoyed a different regime up until now, but they haven't given them that preference in this stamp duty. I think it needs to happen because we all buy fuel.
Yeah.
And what happens is that they pass it on,
Okay.
and a number of people have stopped using their cards in those locations. It's
Or they buy less.
Or they buy
Well,
less.
two things to point out here. First of all, this new adjustment, supposed adjustment, is included in the finance bill that's presently sitting in front of the Senate waiting for approval. So until it's approved, until the Senate passes
it stays in force.
It
But
stays
the current thing stays
it
in
hasn't
force.
been implemented yet. And then my other concern is, you know how we're very quick to implement changes, especially
Well, it's
when
going to take a
asthma-
year. So just buckle up.
Nwaji, really?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to go to our next story right now quickly. NSA, 7 million weapons in illegal hands in Nigeria. The federal government has actually raised the alarm of the possibility of an estimated 7 million illegal weapons being in possession of non-state actors and criminal elements in the country. It said the number represented a total of 8 to 10 million illegal arms in the West African sub-region. Waji, what do you have to say about this story?
And that number you just quoted, 70% of that 8 to 10 million in West Africa happen to be in Nigeria.
Yeah.
I think it's important that always historical context now plays a big part. Proliferation of weapons happens after you have armed conflict stroke war in certain regions of the world, because what happens is that you arm either the military or paramilitary or the rebel groups, whatever the case may be. They have to like get arms and from warlords or whatever the case may be that exist, right? So after the wars are over and you have peace treaties and all these things, these weapons are still around. And then what happens is that they get sold off or they get stolen, they get into the hands of criminal elements. This thing started in Nigeria after the Civil War, okay? Because what happened then during that particular time, you had an expansion in two armies, the Biafran army and the Nigerian army, and then that now resulted in a litany of weapons in the system. And that's when you now began to see the spikes in armed robbery in this country, because what now happens is that individuals happen to have access to small arms. Now when you now begin to look at what was happening in Boko Haram, and then you're now linking it to the transportation of arms moving from the regions in the Sahel, Mali and all those particular places towards northern Nigeria to arm Boko Haram, that's why you're having this particular case. How do you solve it? You have to use your intelligence agencies to understand where these people are. So you can do it through two particular routes. Particular route number one, diplomatic means. You have engagements with these particular groups, therefore have them now bring their arms forward. You can do an arms for food, an arms for cash program, or whatever the case may be. Or you could just go straight brute force tactics and take them out and destroy these arms. Either way, you need to decide what you're doing except being docile. So this is a very good report that NSA has put out. The question now becomes, what are you going to do next? Are you going to go route number one, diplomatic, engage these particular state actors, non-state actors, have them bring their arms forward for immunity or clemency or whatever the case may be, exchange for this to get them going so that we can just move on peacefully?
Like the amnesty program.
Exactly. Or just take them out. So decide.
Thank you, Waji.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to take some of the messages I have in here. I have Olatunji from Majikole, who says, in the new request by Mr. Buhari, it was mentioned that the Minister of Finance will provide a detailed plan for the loan request, which is the main reason the loan request was rejected initially. The Senate will definitely approve this one again because they are rubber stamp legislature already. Wahala de Niger. We have Rainmaker, who says, who is thinking for us as a nation? Today, Tunde, I am not thanking them for Jack. They are clearly not thinking. You charge me for taking cash into the system, charge me too for bringing the same cash you have charged another for when I bring it back into the system.
At no point does it do a thing.
You also charge me for using the POS. The bar should still be raised. 10,000 naira is still a small amount to most of us. Between banks and telcos are already massaging the idea of an extra cost for USSD and internet banking. So who really is doing the thinking?
And very
When we kill
quickly,
the industry,
and
there's
very,
no
very
big
quickly, you
change.
know, these are how revolutions started. When you now begin to look at the American Revolution,
Yeah.
it got kicked off because of double taxation. I'm not saying, I'm just,
You,
I'm just
you
putting
notice,
out
you notice
there.
how all got a little uncomfortable.
I know, but I'm just
There's
saying.
a certain man that no one can bail.
No, but I'm not saying, I'm not calling for anything.
No,
I'm just
no,
giving
no,
you,
yeah,
please, that's not what I'm doing. The point I'm just trying to make is that you need to be careful how you govern, especially with things that have to do with money. That's all, that's my only
You're
part.
even mentioning something.
I can, we all remember Fumiran Sankuti and how she chased the
Perfect
Alaki out
example.
of Egbaland.
Let's move on to this
When he
next
didn't
story
respect
very
himself.
quickly. Today, please let's rush through this story from the Punch newspaper. Lagos creates enforcement committee for traffic laws. It seems like, is there fairy dust to this?
So, Lagos State, sorry.
Yes,
Since we
please.
cannot have the story. Apologies. No. So, look, it's my the only thing I can say is why another, another agency, really and truly. But I think this one is supposed to coordinate, efforts across, because you need law enforcement. At times you need the guys actually doing traffic control. They don't have powers of arrest, and sometimes we know we can be a bit unruly. So sometimes you need to calm an individual down, and the best way we do it is to put policemen with AK-47s.
No, exactly.
But all these bodies need to be coordinated.
They need to
Last
be
mile,
coordinated,
FIRS, VIO,
which is what this is about. So it's okay, but in the end, no matter how you coordinate, once the roads are bad, if there's a crater in the road, people must drive around it.
Nobody's gonna like
yeah,
that. I'm doing that in violent cars, don't drive over. It's because the roads are
so
bad.
we should fix the roads, and it will help traffic.
Thank you very much. The GM of Last Mile was here on Wednesday.
Oh,
He was
really?
talking about if you notice, if you're driving around town, you see some guys or ladies dressed in white and blue, or rather black and white.
Yes.
They're adult staff,
Yeah.
or rather the new recruits.
Yeah, sorry. A very important point that I wanted to mention. The story mentions that they will be enforcing the new executive orders and other existing orders, other existing laws. My question is around the new executive orders. Executive orders are things that the governor has issued as law within the state. Have they sensitized the population? So we know you don't just arrive at a place and say this thing is a crime or it's you're breaking the law. And I'm like,
The Monitoring and Enforcement Coordination Committee, though, is to be headed by former Commissioner for Transport, and we'll see the results that this bring. Guardian newspaper has the next story. Nwaji government to begin campaign for return restitution of looted artifacts. One of the items that they highlighted here is the one called Okuko, a famous Benin bronze cockerel.
We look
I
after it.
We had a replica in my house back then. But Nwaji, please take us through this story.
Wakanda forever, man.
I love this idea, but we
And this is a deeply personal story for me. Big shout out to my father, Chief Newton Jibunoh, because he is one of the people that actually began this campaign in the 70s. And this has been a 40-plus year journey that we have been going through as a family to return these artifacts to Nigeria. Everything from all the Benin works that were stolen in the invasion in 1897 to different things that came out of Yoruba land as well that are scattered and littered throughout Europe. For me, it's a moral principle. It's not about whether we can look after it or not. That's not the conversation. The conversation is righting a particular wrong. And what has now happened is that you have had particular institutions that have come up over this last 40 years, one being Didi Museum, Terra Culture, Nika Art Gallery, Bogobiri, and a whole bunch of other ones who have actually had specialization in looking after artifacts of a particular nature that have to do with the conditioning with regards to the air, the quality controls, and all that stuff as to how you preserve it. So you have Nigerian institutions, privately run and privately funded, that are equipped to actually look after these works. So we should give ourselves some credit. I'm a big believer in these things being returned. They were stolen. They're part of our heritage. They're part of our culture. And they're part of your identity that now steeps within your DNA that was passed down from your ancestors. And if you don't have that particular story to now link yourself to your past, then your future now becomes confused. And that's why we have identity issues. And for me, this is a big thing for me, because we need to reconnect with our past in order for us to seek forth direction to the future. So return our stolen goods, because that's what they were. They were stolen. All right, pure and simple. And no British museum, no European museum has the legitimacy, the right, the authority, or the audacity to speak to anything about ownership. Your ancestors stole it. Please return it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
I just have a slightly different thing.
I know what Tunde is going to say.
I don't want us to.
No, I know what Tunde's point is.
Artifacts,
But that's not the question.
I agree. So there's the moral side to it, but
And
I'm also pragmatic.
Yeah.
So right now, artifacts need to be cared for properly. So many things that we don't take into consideration. Humidity is also a point. It needs the right facilities. Now, if we're not ready for that, can we do two things? At the base of everything is revenue.
Okay.
You guys stole this thing, and you've been displaying it and charging a fee, an entrance fee, or whatever it is. Can you calculate the back money?
Proceeds of
Okay,
pay us?
so in the
Can
event,
we agree revenue share
okay, that's
money for
one.
this
I
thing
agree.
now?
So that's
and
one.
then we invest that money into building proper facilities. And at the time when we're ready to look after our stuff, we come and collect it.
I mentioned 4 places that have been privately funded that can do these things. I
Okay.
can take you
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
them.
Okay, cool.
To see.
I appreciate it. but
Okay,
it's
we
cool.
need
Cool.
more, but these places do exist. But I do agree with you
Yes.
that you know what, give us back pay too.
Especially
Return.
if-
So do you know what? Return the stolen artifacts and cut my check.
Yeah, especially
Alright.
if you're thinking about the money that Abacha looted as artifacts, you know,
Yeah,
how
yeah,
he
yeah.
and I
Exactly.
collected interest on it. So maybe-
Really, Val? Really?
No.
All right, we have G Finance from Majigola who says, "Thanks to Mr. Nwaji. I really appreciate your analysis this morning. God bless you. What happens when you cannot borrow? Maybe they will go begging. May God save us in this country." This one here says, "But the old artifacts we have in Nigeria are poorly maintained. My fears are when these items are returned."
Joseph from Lekki says the recharge card wholesaler earns 2 to 5 naira per 100 naira. 50 naira duty on 10,000 naira is 10% of gross profit. With other taxes and expenses, what do they live on?
All right, and right now is where we kind of put an end to
Yes.
this segment of the show. Thank you very much, Tunde Okufi, for stopping by this morning, as well as Nwaji.
All right.
All right.
So Waji is at the corporate MC, Tunde is at Big Coast. Next, we talk sports inside of the locker room. Stay tuned to Smooth 98.1.
All right.
Good show, guys.
Guys, apparently you guys are not streaming on the website, and a friend of mine is